For the first time, the US has given Ukraine permission to use American weapons to strike Russian territory, but only near the Kharkiv region. Russia has been intensifying its attacks against Ukraine's second biggest city in recent weeks. The local authorities say 3 people have been killed in strikes overnight. Well, discussions on whether Kyiv should be allowed to use Western weapons against targets in Russia has dominated debate in recent weeks. Ukraine and some of its allies say it needs to hit troop concentrations and missile launch sites across the border. Here's the NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg speaking in the last half hour.
We need to remember what this is. This is a war of aggression. Russia has attacked another country, violated international law, invaded Ukraine, and Ukraine has the right for self-defense, and that includes also the right to strike legitimate military targets inside Russia. And let me add to that, this is even more urgent as we see that Russia has opened a new front. They have attacked now again from the north into the Kharkiv region, and the borderline and the front line is more or less the same. So they are hitting Ukraine with missiles, with artillery based inside Russia. And of course, Ukraine must be able to hit back and to defend themselves. This is part of the right for self-defense.
Let's speak to our correspondent Jean Mackenzie in Kyiv. And Jean, what's the reaction been there to the fact that President Biden is now saying he will allow Ukraine to use US weapons in Russia, but albeit in a limited way?
This is a hugely significant step by the US and by President Biden, and it is something that Zelensky has really been pushing on for the past few weeks, as have other countries in Europe. And Biden has, until this moment, stood firm throughout this war, saying that, US weapons should only be used to strike Russian targets inside Ukraine or inside the Russian-occupied parts of Ukraine, and should not be used to strike into Russia itself. And the reason for this is that President Biden has been fearful for escalating this conflict, worried that Russia might perceive Ukraine using Western weapons into Russia as an attack on Russia by the United States or by NATO. But clearly the situation on the battlefield over the last month has changed. We've seen Russian troops go into this Kharkiv region in the northeast of the country, take villages, and the Russians are now using, Russian territory to launch attacks into the Kharkiv region that are devastating. And Zelensky has essentially said that his troops have had to watch these attacks be mounted, and there is nothing that they can do until the missiles and the bombs enter Ukrainian territory. He has said essentially that troops are fighting with one hand behind their back. But as you say, the US has issued very strict rules on what Ukraine is going to be able to do now with these US weapons. So it can only use the weapons to strike over the border in this Kharkiv region where they are being attacked from. So they can't use these weapons on other areas of the front, and crucially they cannot use these long-range US missiles to strike deep into the heart of Russian territory. We know the Ukrainians so far have been using their own drones to strike critical infrastructure in Russia, like power stations and oil refineries. Now this they will not be able to do with these US weapons, but it should help them defend against these glide bombs, which have caused so much devastation in Ukraine over the past couple of months. These are bombs that are launched from Russian planes in Russian territories into Ukrainian territory, and Ukraine will now have more ability to defend against these.
And given the restrictions you mentioned, how quickly do you think this might affect the course of the war if this policy change is implemented?
Well, certainly the Ukrainians have been saying that this will make a big difference to them, and this area along the Kharkiv region is the area where Ukraine has really been feeling the heat from Russia, and that is because it is the only area really where the Russians are able to sit along the border and launch these attacks. So I think the Ukrainians are fairly confident that this is going to make a difference.
Jean Mackenzie, thank you very much indeed.